Next, we are going to be talking about the Socialist Republic of Scotland, because they are about to introduce some of the strictest rent controls that I think we've probably ever seen. I've mentioned earlier in the show, I'm a lawyer, I was a property lawyer. I remember occasionally you would come across Rent Act properties, which was dating back to the early 1970s from memory. My time in law school, it was all a long time ago. And those properties were subject to rent controls. They were always the poorest quality. They were the ones the landlord didn't invest in. In fact, where rent controls have been tried around the world, they seem to have been a catastrophe. But guess what? The Socialist Republic of Scotland, the Scottish National Party and the Greens are going to see if they can do it in Scotland. They've done a lot already, and in fact, if it was working so well, you'd find yourself questioning at home, my friends, why has Edinburgh and Glasgow seen an 11.6% increase in rent while they've had these rent controls, the steepest price increase, I think, anywhere in the UK, but certainly greater than London. I am joined now by James Hummerstone-Pope and Neil Hanvey. James Hummerstone-Pope is an estate agent and Neil Hanvey is an Alba Party member in Westminster. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining me here on Talk TV. James, if I can start with you, could you tell us a bit about what these proposals are and how they will affect the market?
Yeah, sure. So essentially what the SNP are proposing is that they will give the local authorities the power to introduce rent controls and rent caps. So such things as, putting a 5-year ban on landlords, allowing, landlords increasing the rents on the homes that they own and they're renting out, down to the refusal of pets, to the colour that people paint walls. The reality is this will just further squeeze investment into the property market and ultimately reduce the number of rental properties that are available.
But of course, that would normally, James, put rents up. But if they're not allowed to put rent up, then what is actually going to happen?
Well, and this is the thing, Scotland, Edinburgh have seen rent increases that outstrip London, and that's because some of these policies have been put in place already, but it didn't actually they weren't allowed to do it on new tenancies. So effectively what landlords were doing were hiking the prices on new tenancies. If they get to a point where they're no longer able to put up rents, which, by the way, we look at landlords as if they're these massive businesses. There are a large number out there that are actually what we call accidental landlords. They're people that have got properties that they're not able to sell, so they decide to rent them and move on. That's great. It puts the property into the market. It means someone can rent them. These people don't make hundreds of pounds a month on rent. So when mortgage rates have gone up, when the cost of owning those homes and maintenance on them have gone up, essentially they need to recover those costs, so rents have to go up. If they can't do that, ultimately what we're going to see is those people exit the market, which then puts a further strain on the housing market.
Well, thank you, James, for explaining to us. Neil, you're the leader of the Alba Party in Parliament in Westminster. We're colleagues together there. What's the Alba's Party view on these latest slew of changes put forward by the Scottish Government?
Well, I mean, I think the first point I would make is I'm not completely opposed to having some form of rent control in place, but that doesn't work in isolation. And what this policy effectively is the Green Party's continued virtue signalling that they're, on the side of the people. But the reality is, and my office deals with housing issues all the time, is there is no housing stock. And so in that situation where you potentially introduce a policy that will further deplete the housing stock as people who are landlords, accidental or otherwise, as James just mentioned, they withdraw their properties from the housing market for fear of the consequences of this, or there are disinvestment in housing stock. You exacerbate the problem of homelessness. Now, I've got a whole list of constituents who I've been working with for a number of years who have the maximum housing points available for a whole range of different reasons. And the reality is that Fife Council have no housing stock available. There is no investment.
Well, Neil, look, let's nationally. I mean, I know Fife Council may not build houses, but nationally, there's a Scottish government. Why are there any plans coming out of the SNP government to build more houses? Surely that's the solution.
No, and this policy is likely to make that even more difficult. Why would a developer consider building, affordable housing or controlled rent housing when it's clear that they will be prevented from realizing any potential profit from that development, or indeed that development may actually be done at a loss because of
But Neil, so you started off saying that you support rent controls then.
No,
I mean, rent controls, just to put my position on the record for what it's worth, rent controls do not work. They lead to a lack of investment in property. They actually end up with skyrocketing rents. Of course, this is only small areas of Scotland. I can confirm to you that if you live outside one of these areas, your rents won't be controlled, therefore they will go up. I can also confirm apparently that it won't apply to camper vans, but that's an inside political joke for those of us who get it. But you said you support them, Neil.
No, I said I'm not completely opposed to them.
Okay, well, you're not completely opposed to them or support them?
In certain contexts, but you have to look at the whole picture, and there's been no real critical thinking here. What needs to happen if you want to have affordable housing is that you drive the economy forward, increase the salaries and the available employment to people, boost the economy, and then the cost of renting accommodation becomes less of an issue. Okay. But what this policy tries to do is to solve the problem, but without addressing all of the economic problems that we have. I mean, the Scottish government would be better spending their time preventing the loss of jobs in places like Grangemouth Oil Refinery, or building a strong economy so that rent controls cease to be an issue. What they're as I said at the beginning, what they're effectively doing is virtue signaling to say that we're doing something worthy, but actually also not solving any problem at all.
Neil, let me bring James back in, because he's our property expert. We're really grateful to have you on. So, James, let me put this scenario to you. So what happens is the rent is controlled up to 5 years, where there's going to, reportedly, a 0% increase in rent for up to 5 years. Your mortgage goes up, your property needs re-roofing, the drive needs repairing, the garden fence falls down. Landlord's going to have to spend that money. If they've got a big mortgage, they might lose the property. They might choose to sell the property even if they don't, because they're not making money. What do you think, looking forward over that 5-year period where no rent increases will be allowed in some areas, what will be the impact more widely on the property market? Is it going to drive prices down? That might be I mean, if you're renting and you want to buy your first property, you might welcome prices coming down. What's going to happen widely?
What we will see is we'll see more properties coming to the market for sale, because I can guarantee you, and I've spoken over the last 24 hours to a number of investors who have said, if I have rent controls imposed on me, I will sell my properties and I will not rent them. If the market is demanding a higher value, I want to be able to realise that value. This is a business for me. So what do we see over the next 5 years? We see far more properties becoming available for rent, which is a big issue. We see the quality of housing drop through the floor, and more importantly, it just becomes far harder for people to be able to take a step forward and actually build a home for themselves, whether that's owning or renting.
James, let me just push on that. So, look, let's say you're a landlord, you sell the property, another landlord won't buy it because they'll be just as concerned about the rent controls. So surely prices will come down, and these people who are renting will say, well, now I can afford to buy, so maybe this is a good thing.
No, well, look, house prices may come down, but the reality is that we still have we have housing prices within the country that are still 7 to 10 times more than people's average salary. So actually buying homes is still very, very difficult for people to be able to do. And actually the more preferred route for some people is renting. Some people just don't want to own their own home anymore because of the cost of living. So yes, we will see more homes come to the market, but the problem is there are far more people that either don't want to buy or will never be in a position to buy, whereby these issues will just further impede them being able to have their own home. And what we will see is more families doubling up. We're already seeing it, where 2 or 3 families are living under the same roof. That's nuts. That's actually nuts. What needs to happen, and I talk about it regularly, is rather than rent controls, rather than look like they're saving a few quid for people up front now,
James, Neil, thank you so much for joining us. That is really, really interesting. And